7 spine-chilling vacation horrors, terrifying secrets and sinister mysteries revealed from abroad. The Harpers thought they were blessed. A dream trip to Altenburg, a quaint village wrapped in foggy mystery, promised adventure and family bonding. But as their car rolled down the eerily quiet streets, an unsettling chill crept in. Faces of the locals, stretched in toothy grins, felt practiced, like puppets on a string. Tom gripped the wheel tighter, eyeing the twisted trees that lined the road like watchful sentinels. Something in the air felt wrong, but with laughter and enthusiasm bubbling over, they brushed their concerns aside. As they arrived at the cozy resort, excitement mixed with an unshakable unease. Cobblestone paths led to charming cottages, but whispers floated among the villagers, phrases barely audible, missing travelers never returned. Susan felt unease coil in her stomach as she gathered supplies at the market. Shiny apples and fresh bread didn't mask the tense air. While she felt the eyes of the townsfolk trace her movements, she shrugged it off, attributing it to their shy ways. After all, they were here for a vacation, a respite from the mundane. Jake and Mia were eager to explore, so they set off for the lake, the scene picture perfect. The sun shimmered on the water, and laughter rang out as they set up their picnic. Yet around them, the trees stood like rotting tombstones, remnants of ancient tales, their twisted limbs reaching skyward as if in warning. The feeling of being watched brushed against their skin, but they quickly dismissed it. As dusk settled, the cottage welcomed them with warmth, but shadows danced against the walls, sparks of anxiety licking at Tom's chest. They had barely settled down when Mia uncovered a journal hidden beneath the floorboards. Its pages were yellowed and crumbling, filled with tales that sent shivers through her small frame, stories of travelers lost to the forest spirits, lured by promises of a forgotten festival. The family laughed uneasily, shaking off the chill. This was just folklore, right? But as they gathered for dinner, Jake suddenly gasped. He had seen a figure lurking at the tree's edge, a dark silhouette that sent his heart racing. Tom dismissed it, probably just a deer, buddy. But the unsettling feeling nestled deeper, a whisper at the back of their minds, growing ever stronger. Then, at nightfall, Tom vanished. A simple walk around the block turned into frantic searches through the fog, but the villagers no longer smiled. Their eyes, once friendly, turned cold and blank. "Where is he?" Susan pleaded, but they simply chuckled, brushing off her questions as if she were a child with a nightmare. Panic clawed at her insides, the air thickened with every unanswered echo of his name. Suddenly, a note slipped under the cottage door. "They'll take you next unless you leave," it read. Fear constricted around their throats. The village closed in around them, walls of fog and shadows tightening, suffocating. Their eyes darted towards the window where shadows flitted past, teasing, beckoning. Were they friends or foes? Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. In the hushed aftermath, Jake's face went pale, he was gone into the veil of water-soaked darkness. Susan and Mia's hearts pounded as they sprinted through the fog, desperate breaths mingling with the whispers that seemed to spill out from every corner. The barn loomed suddenly ahead, shadows coiling around it like fingers stretching out to trap them. The door creaked ominously, a whisper of warning in the silence. They stood frozen, pulse racing, breath hitching in their throats. What awaited them inside? A terrifying secret, or something more sinister? Their hands trembled as the door slowly pushed open, and a bone-chilling scream sliced through the night. Would they be the next victims of this cursed village? The scream ripped through the air like a knife, freezing Susan and Mia in place. Their eyes widened, pupils dilating as the sound echoed in their minds. Panic surged, thick and suffocating as they hesitated at the barn door, glancing at each other. The smell of wet earth mixed with something far more ominous, like decay, lingered around them. "Mom, what was that?" Mia whispered, her small voice trembling. I don't know. But we need to move." Susan could barely manage the words as fear injected adrenaline into her veins. Grabbing Mia's hand, they exchanged a brief nod of determination, and edged cautiously inside the barn, drawn by an irresistible force mingling horror with curiosity. Inside, shadows cloaked everything. The dim light filtering through cracked windows flickered in rhythm with Susan's racing heart. Dust swirled around them as they stepped on the rotten straw, each crunch echoing like thunder in their ears. They scanned their surroundings, dread settling deeper. Old tools hung from the walls, rusting relics of a forgotten time. In the corner, a large, dark outline shifted slightly. Was there something hiding within? "Mia, stay close to me," Susan instructed, her voice steadier than she felt. As they moved further in, the extraordinarily cold air enveloped them, as if they had stumbled into some other realm. They reached the inner area of the barn and halted again. Something was wrong. The wooden beams creaked under an unseen weight, a low resonating whisper that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once, wrapping around them like a heavy blanket. "Do you hear that?" Mia asked, her eyes wide with fear. The whispers grew clearer, incoherent words mixing and melding, but through the chaos, the phrases took shape. Leave now, no, it's just the wind." Susan tried to reassure them both, but her own heart pounded furiously under the weight of a growing dread. Just as she bent down to inspect the old tools, her gaze fell upon a small altar at the far end of the barn. Candles, burnt down to nubs, surrounded a large, dark figure covered with a thick shroud. "What is that?" Mia tugged at her sleeve fearfully, eyes locked on the altar. "I don't know." Susan stepped closer, each footfall heavy with dread. The smell of burning wax mixed with something rancid, something not meant to linger in the air. She felt her stomach turn. As they approached, the figure trembled, slowly revealing a face pale and gaunt. It turned towards them with empty eyes that pulsated with an unnatural blackness. Mia gasped, everything that once seemed like a vacation now twisted into a nightmare. The figure opened its mouth, but rather than words, a terrible sound emanated, a chilling wail of despair that cut through the very essence of their souls. "Help me!" Before they could comprehend, the ground beneath them rumbled violently. A crevice opened, swallowing the dark figure whole. The candles flickered violently, as if the barn itself groaned under some unseen curse. "Run!" Susan shouted, yanking Mia as they darted out of the barn, the very air behind them thickening with something sinister. Outside, the fog had thickened, coiling like a serpent around the barn, blocking their path. The faint light from their cottage stood like a distant beacon. "We have to get back before too late." The villagers emerged from the shadows, faces blank again, steps synchronized in a haunting dance. "What are they doing?" Mia whimpered, eyes wide as terror painted her cheeks. "They're not human anymore, Mia." Susan breathed out, heart pounding, dread pooling in her gut. She pulled on her daughter's arm, desperately searching for escape. From behind, a chilling voice echoed, "You shouldn't have come here." As they sprinted through the oppressive mist, one question clawed at Susan's mind: would they escape, or become another shadow in this cursed village? The villagers moved closer, their expressions devoid of humanity, and each step echoed like the sound of a hammer on metal. Susan didn't think, she just pulled Mia tighter against her, adrenaline coursing through her veins. They darted to the left, navigating through the thick fog that twisted around them, feeling heavier with every breath. The air grew damp, clinging to their skin, cold as a grave. Each beat of Susan's heart pounded in her ears, drowning out the whispers of the villagers, humming an eerie tune that seemed born of despair. Mia stumbled, and for a moment, Susan feared they would be separated. She turned, lifting her daughter's chin to meet her eyes. "We need to run, baby. Just hold my hand." Drawing in a deep breath, they sprinted toward the dark shape of the trees looming in the distance, a promise of concealment. But as they neared, the trees twisted grotesquely, their branches stretching out like skeletal fingers, clawing at the sky. "Mama, please!" Mia cried, her voice brittle, breaking the silence reinforced by the fog. "Why are they? What do they want?" "I don't know." Susan gasped, tightening her grip. The villagers continued their relentless pursuit, their pace unnervingly synchronized, like a well-rehearsed performance. She could feel the fear rolling off Mia in waves, matching her own spiraling dread, each bolt of terror marking them both. The oppressive atmosphere felt alive, wrapping around them like a smothering darkness. They dashed into the forest, branches slapping against their faces, scraping their skin. Each footfall echoed under the canopy, chased by the relentless murmurs returning, now faintly echoing through the trees. Leave. Suddenly, Susan stumbled, her foot catching in the underbrush. She fell to her knees, the ground cold and wet, mud gripping her like a vice. "Mom!" Mia clutched at her, eyes pooling with tears. Suspecting they were merely seconds away from being captured, Susan pushed herself back up, pulling Mia along. "We need to find a place to." A bone-chilling howl pierced the air, wild and mournful, causing the air to shake. From the mist stepped a shadow, larger than any human, its feature writhing as if it were made of smoke and nightmares. The breath caught in Susan's throat as it raised an arm, bony fingers pointing directly at them. "Run!" She screamed again, pulling Mia towards an old stone ruin barely visible through the fog. The walls stood as crumbling sentinels, and the visibility shifted, illusions dancing with panic in their minds. As they crossed the threshold, the shadows shifted behind them, the villagers at the edge of the clearing, mouths moving silently like marionettes. They halted, forming a ring, and for the first time, Susan caught a glimpse of fleeting expressions: torment, joy, dread, all emotions mangled together. "What are they doing?" Mia whispered again, pressing closely to her mother. I think they're waiting for something," Susan replied breathlessly, peering through the ruins. The howl shrieked once more, deeper this time, rumbling through the ground and melding with a soft chant from the villagers. "Help me," echoed a voice, familiar yet foreign. It rattled within Susan's skull, making her heart stutter. She turned, eyes wide and searching for Mia. The shadows shifted again, the ground below vibrating in response. "Mama, I don't want to be here." Mia's voice trembled, and Susan felt a pang of despair, unsure if they could stand against this nightmarish force. As the shadow drew closer, Susan could see its form take shape, a figure from her past, lost yet one she recognized too well. "Mom?" Mia's grip tightened, fear palpable. "What do we do?" Susan faced the impending darkness, every instinct screaming to protect her child, even from what may come. There was no turning back now, and in that moment of undeniable terror, one thought penetrated the chaos: what terrible truth awaited them if they dared to uncover it? The overwhelming dread hung in the air, and Susan felt its encroachment. As the fog thickened, an echo of laughter broke through, a sound so wrong, so twisted. "Run!" Susan yelled again, "We have to find a way out." But would they uncover the secret hidden in the shadows, or would the fog claim them for good? Susan's legs felt like stone as she dragged them across the threshold of the crumbling ruin. The cold air bore down on her, an unwelcome weight that stifled her breath. She glanced back just in time to see the shadow, now clearly a figure from her own childhood nightmares, moving toward them, its form flickering in and out of focus. She desperately pulled Mia deeper into the ruins, the walls of the ancient structure offering at least some semblance of sanctuary. "Stay close," Susan ordered, her voice shaking. She could hear the villagers' chants crescendo behind them, a haunting hymn that seeped into her bones. Mia's breaths came quick and shallow at her side, each gasp a mirror of Susan's own frantic heartbeat. "Mama, I'm scared." Mia whimpered, the weight of fear palpable. "I know, sweetheart. Just hold on tight." The inside of the ruin was pitch black, a cavernous void that seemed to stretch infinitely. With each step, the shadows morphed and twisted, losing themselves in the thick mist that curled like tendrils around them. The laughter echoed again, a sinister melody interwoven with the villagers' chants. It sounded like a taunt, mocking their fears, and each note wrapped around Susan's heart, squeezing tighter. They stumbled into a large room filled with shattered remnants of old stone. It felt timeless, as if someone had forgotten to close the door to the past, leaving behind memories too fragile to bear. The air was heavy with dust, and the scent of decay mingled with the damp earth. Susan strained her eyes, trying to pierce through the deep shadows, a flicker of hope clinging to her thoughts that maybe they could hide long enough to escape this nightmare. "Mama, look!" Mia pointed at a shadow flitting about at the edges of the room. A shape, small and flickering, danced just out of reach. It froze, revealing an outline of what could be a doorway, its edges dimly lit and devoid of the thick fog outside. "That could be our way out," Susan whispered, moving toward it. But the closer they got, the more the villagers' chant enveloped them, flooding the room, shaking the very foundation beneath Susan's feet. The air vibrated with a low hum, drowning out all thought, filling her mind with chaos. With every step, she felt the despair threatening to pull her under. "Come on, Mia. We have to move." Suddenly, a piercing scream cut through the ominous melody. It was a voice she recognized, one that twisted her stomach into a knot. A wisp of a figure emerged from the shadows, another villager gripping something in their hands, eyes wide with terror. "Mama, please. They're coming." The villager's voice, raw and desperate, was a chilling echo of her own daughter's fears. "Run!" Susan shouted, instinctively shielding Mia with her body. The villagers moved in a synchronized wave. They were getting closer. The flickering light of the doorway beckoned them, but the darkness surged like a tide. "Help me, help me." The whispered words strangled her mind, dread clawed at her throat, but she couldn't stop. They had to reach that doorway. As they dashed toward it, Susan glanced over her shoulder. The shadow now took a more defined form, floating above the villagers, its eyes an abyss of malice. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest as she realized that the figure wasn't just a remnant of her past, it was a part of this horror. "Go, Mia!" She screamed, throwing her legs forward, the doorframe finally within reach. Mia rushed ahead, but in a blink, the villagers lunged, swarming them like a ravenous tide. Susan felt a cold grip on her ankle, tugging her back. Panic surged through her veins as she desperately clawed for Mia's hand. She couldn't lose her. Not now. As darkness closed around them, the last echo of a joyous laugh slipped from the ground below, ringing through the air like a death knell. You cannot escape. The world flipped into chaos, shadows colliding, screams racing through the fog, leaving Susan with one last thought: what sinister fate awaited them if they crossed the threshold of the doorway. With a final heave, she lunged forward, heart racing. But as weightlessness pulled her away, would they emerge alive or be lost to the whispers forever? Susan gasped as they fell into nothingness, the ground beneath her vanishing like sand through fingers. The weight of the fear and despair pulled at her, but the suffocating darkness soon yielded to a blinding light. She tumbled into a world that felt wrong, distortions swirling around her like remnants of a fever dream. They landed in a small chamber, the walls damp and decaying. Dim light pooled from an unseen source, revealing more shadows than clarity. It took a moment for her mind to scramble back to reality, but when it did, she immediately turned to find Mia. "Mama? Where are we?" Mia's voice trembled, laced with confusion and terror. I don't know," Susan whispered, still trying to steady her breath. A sickly sweet scent wafted through the space, making her stomach churn. She scanned the room, heart pounding with a rhythmic dread. Cold stone underfoot sent shivers racing up her spine. "Stay close, okay?" she urged, pulling Mia to her side, clutching her tight. They crept forward, every sound amplified each breath, each scratch of their shoes against the stone echoing inside the chamber until it felt like screaming. But Susan couldn't shake the sensation that they weren't alone. Flickers of movement caught her attention, shadows darting just beyond the edges of her vision. Then the whispers returned, hushed voices weaving around them, framing an insidious chorus. "Come join us, come play, Mama, I don't like it here." Mia cried, her body trembling against hers. I know, Susan murmured, panic crystallizing in her chest. "We have to find a way out." As they ventured deeper into the chamber, the walls began to shift, bulging inward like a breath. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by unseen hands. Susan clenched her jaw to suppress the rising nausea, fury igniting as she pushed through. Suddenly, a figure appeared before them, emerging from the far shadows. It loomed tall and grotesque, its fragmented face twisted in a smile that didn't reach its eyes. "Came to play, have you?" It hissed, voice slithering around them like fog. "Stay back!" Susan shouted, positioning herself protectively in front of Mia. The figure only laughed, a sound that split her head with an unbearable pressure. Legions of shadows began spilling forth from the corners of the chamber, writhing and chattering like some horrific playground. A pounding fear pulsed in Susan's skull. "Mia, we need to move. Now!" Forcing herself to turn, they raced to find an exit, but the mass of darkness closed in faster than they could run. The whispers swelled to a roar, suffocating and hungry. The air thickened, turning to sludge, wrapping around them, slowing their steps. "Mama, help!" Mia shrieked, her small fingers slipping from Susan's grasp. "No!" Susan whirled around, but it was too late. The shadows enveloped Mia, a surge of darkness pulling her away, twisting her silhouette until it vanished. Panic twisted in Susan's chest, and desperation clawed at her throat. "Mia!" She cried out, but her voice faltered, swallowed by the chaotic laughter and whispers. Everything around her warped, the walls pulsating as if alive, sensing her despair. She fought against the tide of shadows, scrambling toward the spot where Mia had vanished, reaching into the fog, but only finding emptiness. "Mama!" A distant cry drifted from the depths of darkness, a faint flicker of hope intertwined with terror, echoing still, urging her closer. Susan hesitated. What if it's a trap? A part of her gnawed. But just as she was about to retreat, a name whispered on the wind, shocking her to her core. Susan. Before she could contemplate the source, the shadows lunged again, consuming her in a vile embrace. The last thing she saw was the stark light, narrowing down to a pinpoint, before it too disappeared. What she didn't realize was that the darkness was only just beginning to play its cruel game. And as she dissolved into the void, one chilling truth crept into her mind: escaping the ruin was only the start. What awaited them on the other side was far worse than anything she could have imagined. The crushing embrace of darkness released Susan, but the relief was fleeting. She found herself sprawled on the cold, hard ground again, gasping for air. The chamber had vanished, replaced by long, twisting corridors echoing with the same whispers that chilled her to the bone. Their sinister draw beckoned her forward, and Susan felt that familiar dread rise, threatening to swallow her whole. "Mia!" she called, her voice cracking. Panic surged, tightening her chest like a vice. Every footfall felt like a betrayal of her resolve. She needed to move, needed to find her daughter. Shadows flickered at the edges of the corridor, darting in and out of view. They seemed to dance, taunting her with their chaotic, unpredictable movements. The walls were inscribed with horrific images, twisted faces, longing hands, and phrases that lurked just beyond her comprehension. "Join us," they seemed to hiss. "Stay forever." The air became thick with despair, wrapping around her like a suffocating fog. A sound cut through the whispers, a soft, almost delicate weeping. "Mama?" The tone was faint but unmistakable. Susan's heart leaped, thrumming loudly against her rib cage. "Mia! I'm coming!" She stumbled down the corridor, urgency propelling her. "Come play" echoed against the stone, an almost playful innocence that was anything but. Each step seemed to lead her deeper into a trap. As she turned a sharp corner, Susan stopped dead. Before her, in the dim light, stood a door. It was old, wooden, adorned with carvings that writhed as if alive. The weeping intensified, and Susan felt her skin crawl. With a breath of bitter resolve, she reached for the handle. A guttural growl resonated from within. The door rattled violently, a warning. But Mia's cries were louder, echoing into the void, merging with the torment that filled the air. "Please, Mama. Hold on, sweetheart." Susan yelled back, nerves fraying as she pushed the door open. It creaked, protests mingling with the chilling sounds on the other side. Inside, the room was vast and suffocating. Shadows danced across the walls, twisting into grotesque shapes that blinked and flickered. The air smelled of decay, a heavy sweetness that wrapped around her throat. In the center, an empty cradle rocked back and forth, yet there was nothing inside but emptiness and echoes of despair. "Mama." The voice, once distant, now pierced through the obscurity, sounding desperate, scared. Susan's heartbeat thundered in her ears. "Mia. Where are you?" The shadows around her coiled, closing in. She sensed them pulling her backwards, away from the cradle, urging her to leave. With every ounce of strength, she leaped forward, fighting against the tide of darkness. The urge to abandon this place grew stronger, more insistent. Dread laced through her veins, and the whispers surged around her, a cacophony that felt like dark fingers pressing against her mind. A flicker caught her eye, a flash of familiar movement. Susan turned, breath catching in her throat. There, behind the cradle, a shadow shifted, and within it, she saw a tiny hand extend, trembling. "Mia." In her blind rush, Susan dove toward the cradle, reaching and grasping for her daughter. The moment their hands connected, a shockwave of warmth surged through her, but it was quickly snuffed out as the shadows thrashed violently, wrenching them apart. "Mama." Mia's terrified scream echoed, causing Susan's heart to shatter. She felt the darkness climbing up her limbs, pulling her away from everything she loved, consuming their cries with chilling laughter. Susan fought back, channeling every ounce of her being into reaching for Mia, but the darkness twisted and morphed, creating an insurmountable barrier between them. "Mama, help." Mia's fading voice hung in the air like a fading star, leaving Susan in the depths of despair. "Please." She smashed her fists against the invisible force, desperation bringing tears to her eyes. As the shadows dragged her down, whispering promises of eternal play and twisted lies, a pivotal thought struck her. What if the darkness was feeding on their fear, growing stronger with every cry? With one last sob, Susan realized something chilling: there was no escape unless she faced her fears head-on. But could she do that without sacrificing Mia? Time was slipping, the shadows tightened their grip, threatening to sever them completely. And in that final moment, one dreadful question echoed through her mind: what if letting go was the only way to save her daughter? All that remained was to decide who would pay that price. Darkness wrapped around Susan like a sickening embrace, and the whispers grew louder, merging into a throbbing pulse that matched her racing heart. "Let go," they urged. "Join us." They carried the weight of 1,000 lost souls, all demanding what she could not give. "Mia." She screamed again, choked with sobs. The shadows pulsed in response, undulating like a living, breathing creature, as if her call had increased their hunger. She could feel them, cold tendrils reaching for her, promising warmth and comfort if only she would submit. Sickened, Susan shook her head fiercely, dispelling the illusions that flickered in her mind. She had to think, had to fight back. Letting go wasn't an option, she had to protect Mia. But the panic surged again, her thoughts spiraling down the dark well of despair. "Mama, please." Her daughter's voice cracked through the chaos, sharper than glass. It was a lifeline, fragile yet incandescent against the blackness. Desperate measures required desperate actions. Susan steeled herself. The shadows might thrive on fear, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Clenching her fists, she focused on Mia, on the warmth of their bond, on the memories of laughter shared in sunlit parks. "I'm coming, Mia." The words burst from her lips, true and strong like a battle cry. She steered her thoughts away from the suffocating dread. Each step towards the cradle became a fierce act of defiance against the darkness. She could feel the pull loosening as she opened her heart to the strength of her love. Images of Mia flooded her mind, the two of them baking together, the way her daughter's laughter echoed through their home, and the tender hugs that felt like home. This wasn't just a fight to escape, it was a fight to reclaim their light. As she pressed onward, Susan forced herself to confront the shadows, scowling as if she could physically command them to back off. "You won't have her," she shouted, her voice rising above the cacophony. The shadows hesitated, swirling around her with chaotic indignation. For a fleeting moment, they hesitated, as if they couldn't quite comprehend her defiance. But deep within their collective murmur, she felt a roiling anger brewing. The cradle swayed gently, creaking under an unseen weight. Susan made a beeline toward it. With each determined step, the darkness writhed, pulling back in response to her resolve. "Mama." Mia's voice sounded closer now, a beacon drawing her through the tempest. Forcing herself into the eye of the storm, Susan dived toward the cradle, the shadows screeching in indignation, claws raking at her ankles. "Mia. I'm almost there." Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the flicker of movement again, that tiny hand beckoning her, filled with hope and desperation. With the last ounce of strength, she lunged forward, grabbing the cradle and feeling its cold wooden surface. It felt impossibly heavy, but she did not relent. She could see her daughter's face, pale and streaked with tears, eyes wide with fear yet filled with an unwavering trust that gave Susan strength. Suddenly, dark tendrils lashed out, trapping her wrists and yanking her back. "Stay with us," the whispers demanded, a chilling promise hanging in the air, but Susan fought with every fiber of her being. "I won." She screamed defiantly, as she managed to turn her grip into something more than a physical battle. She concentrated, channeling all her love into a single thought: we will not be separated. The room shuddered, darkness vibrating with an unearthly wail. Shadows recoiled, reforming into chaotic shapes, knitting together and threatening to close in once more. But Mia was there, pleading, a shining light veering closer within the swirling storm. Susan summoned that light within her, fed it with pure love, and unleashed it against the shadows. They shrieked, a cacophony of chaos that felt like an exploding star. "Let my daughter go!" she roared. An unholy roar resounded as the shadows slipped and buckled, pulling away from Susan and the cradle as she clenched her teeth and pushed her spirit into that defiant force of love, refusing to let go. But in the silence that followed, a new sensation pricked at the edges of Susan's awareness, a sense of foreboding. What if the darkness was not merely adversarial? What if it was waiting, patient and calculating, for them to reveal their true vulnerabilities? With a sob, she reached for Mia again, but the cradle shifted unexpectedly, as if the shadows, in their fury, sought something more sinister beneath the surface. "No!" Panic returned, clawing at the edges of her mind. With a gasp, she realized the cradle wasn't just any cradle. What if it was a gateway? Mia's tiny voice echoed again, just as Susan reached for her. "Mama, please." And in that dreadful moment, Susan understood the truth: the darkness was merely a reflection of the fears within them both. But what darkness lurked in Mia's heart, waiting to intertwine with their chaotic fate? Could they rise together, or would this shadowy corridor consume them both? Susan's heart drummed in her chest as she felt the cradle shake beneath her hands. It was more than a cradle now, it was a threshold, a rift between their world and something far worse. The shadows hissed and snarled, swirling like a tempest at the edges of her mind, threatening to pull her back down into the void. Mama! Mia cried, her voice tinged with desperation, but it seemed to pull them both deeper into the darkness. Tears streamed down Susan's face as she gripped the cradle tighter, feeling cold, unnatural fingers brushing against her skin, clawing at her resolve. "Mia, I'm here!" she shouted, throat raw, struggling against the dark that whispered promises of relief from pain, of release from relentless fear. "We need to fight. We need to," but the shadows surged, engulfing the cradle, wrapping around Susan like chains. Their chill seeped into her bones, clouding her thoughts. "Fear it's your enemy," they breathed, their voices melding into one loud echo. "Give in, and join us." "No!" she screamed again, breaking free from their grasp, focusing on the radiant light of her daughter's love. She could see it, shimmering just beyond the veil of darkness, too precious to lose. With a newfound resolve, Susan closed her eyes, summoning a shield forged from the memories of joy that Mia had filled her life with, the laughter and the endless games they played. "You can't take us!" she shouted, and as she opened her eyes, she saw the shadows screeching, recoiling from her fierce determination. But beneath her confidence lay an insidious doubt, creeping in like the cold breath of the darkness. What if this power wasn't enough? What if the shadows could take Mia away, twisting her love into something unrecognizable? With a surge of adrenaline, she dove deeper into the abyss, fighting the pull of the unknown. She knew she could not look away from her daughter's face, that hope which clung to her like a fragile thread. "Mama!" Mia's voice rang like a distant bell, but Susan struggled to reach her, the cradle shifting wildly beneath her as the shadows clawed for control. "Get away!" Suddenly, the fabric of the room twisted painfully. The walls vibrated, a harsh echo enveloping them. Susan hesitated, her body instinctively guarding against the unseen forces swirling dangerously close. But she pressed onward, palms against the cradle, mustering what little courage remained. Something shifted within her, a resonance of fear and excitement. She could feel the cradle pulsating as if it were alive. "We have to go now!" she screamed, realizing that she was indeed ready to push through. She had to breach the surface of this heinous darkness. As she lunged forward, the shadows struck with ferocity, dark visages morphing into shapes that were grotesque and familiar, faces of fears once kept locked away. She saw herself, drowning in despair, but Mia's light pierced the veil. With a roar echoing through the chaos, she reached desperately for her daughter. Just then, the shadows contorted, twisting around her ankles like serpents. "You cannot escape," they hissed. "You will remain here, where the darkness ignites your past." In that chilling moment, a horrific realization sank in. What if they weren't simply trying to consume her? What if they wanted her to unleash the very darkness she feared the most? Her heart shook in her chest. The cradle was their battleground, and she could feel the insidious tendrils tugging on her soul, whispering promises of release, but it felt wrong, too intimate. With a wild gasp, she shouted, "I will not be you." The shadows howled, a wailing sound that threatened to burst her eardrums. The darkness around her flickered, pulsing erratically as though they had been dealt a severe blow. She fought against the gripping shadows, thrashing, ready to tear through any remnants of darkness that threatened to bind her spirit. Susan could see Mia, eyes wide with fear yet bright like the morning sun. "No!" she screamed, feeling the chains slacken slightly, the shadows roaring in protest. Fighting against her own dread, she began to pull Mia towards her, reaching for that bright light. "Hold on. We'll face it together." But just when she felt them nearly in reach, the shadows conspired once more, suddenly rising as if to shield the cradle from her grasp. Panic flashed through her veins, and she had to know if she confronted the darkness within, would she fragment, or could she become whole? "Mama!" Mia cried, her voice echoing across the void. "Please," she breathed, for this nightmare had twisted into something beyond control. Susan prepared to delve into the darkness that lay in her heart, balancing on a knife's edge. Could focusing on that darkness grant them strength, or would it spell their doom? She didn't know which was more terrifying, giving into the pull of despair, or risking everything to shatter it once and for all. The shadows recoiled momentarily, thrashing and twisting in agony, as if her words had struck some deep chord. Susan seized the moment, slipping into the darkness that gripped her less tightly. She understood, suddenly, that the shadows fed on doubt. Their tendrils danced and coiled around her, but they couldn't sustain themselves against her hope. She had to push through the murky veil to save Mia. "Mama." Mia's voice wove through the dimness, a lifeline dragging Susan back from the brink. With every ounce of strength, she reached forward, her fingers brushing against the edge of the cradle. The very air buzzed with tension, vibrating through her body like a low hum, the cradle thrumming with life that seemed to echo her heartbeat. Then darkness. Heavy and unyielding, it pressed against her, the cries of anguish morphing into a cacophony of whispers. "Join us," they beckoned seductively. "Free yourself of the burden. Embrace the shadows. You belong here." Susan clenched her teeth tight, swallowing hard against the tide of despair battering her mind. "No!" she shrieked, each word igniting a spark of defiance. "I won't let you take her. Not my daughter." As if in response to her defiance, the shadows roiled and surged, spilling over the edges of the cradle. It felt alive, now alive with despair that reached out with long, clawed fingers. Susan felt a sharp, biting chill sweep through her body, and a freezing panic gripped her heart. What if she failed? What if she couldn't push through this darkness? Just as terror threatened to overwhelm her, a flicker caught her eye, the dim glow that had ignited her resolve. Mia's own small hand stretched outward, arms wide open, beckoning her with innocent trust. It was the light Susan needed. "I'm coming, baby," she shouted, forcing herself forward against the suffocating shadow. The cradle shook violently as if rejecting her. Shadows twisted and morphed into familiar faces: her mother, her husband, those who had known her joy and her anguish. They turned to her, eyes hollow and void, mouths moving without sound as a deep despair seeped into Susan's veins. "You can't escape your past," they murmured, voices distorted, blending with the cries of the damned. "No." With every ounce of will, Susan pushed back, a sudden surge of heat coursing through her. She focused on the love she felt for Mia, her giggles, the delicate curls of hair, the way her laughter lit up even the darkest rooms. Fueled by that light, she opened her heart wide and let the memories wash over her, a tide of warmth that burned away the chill. "You aren't my past." The shadows howled once more, shrill and furious, a storm of rage as they writhed violently, crashing against her protective barrier. Susan felt the cradle lift beneath her fingertips, vibrating with energy. The room around her became a dizzying swirl of colors and shapes, melding into a chaotic tapestry that threatened to swallow her whole. "Mama." Mia's voice pierced the chaos again, and Susan's heart raced wildly. She focused on that sound, pure and unwavering. She would not let the darkness drown it out. With a primal scream echoing from deep within, Susan exploded into action. She propelled herself forward, plunging into the shadows, determined to reclaim her daughter from this malevolent abyss. The moment felt eternal. Shadows pressed tighter, cold fingers grazing her skin, promises of solace whispering temptingly. But with each layer peeled back, she felt the light of love pushing through, urging her on. Then she felt it, a flicker in the dark. A panic-stricken gasp tore through her. No! The realization struck her like a punch: the cradle couldn't just hold Mia. It could hold them both captive, shrouded in the weight of despair. Would they be united forever in this hell? Suddenly, a bright flash reverberated, and the shadows screamed, writhing, forcing her back. Susan faltered, adrenaline spiking her fear. What if I lose her? The fear was slick and oily, consuming her from the inside. But in that fleeting moment of despair, a fresh determination flared within her. It wasn't just about facing the darkness anymore, it was about fighting back with everything she had. If she could harness the shadows, use them, instead of letting them consume her, she clamped down on that thought, fear brimming at the corners of her mind. I will not let you take her. The shadows recoiled again, thrashing like a wounded beast. Susan's resolve solidified, an anchor in the storm. She inched closer to the cradle, holding on to that reckoning. Perhaps by confronting her own darkness, she could redirect its power, force it to aid her in liberating Mia. But deep down, a question gnawed at her: if she embraced this darkness, what might it demand in return? Mama! Mia's voice rang out yet again, desperate and clingy but not far from her grasp. Susan's heart raced, torn between the shadows and the light, ready to leap into the unknown. What would happen if she plunged headfirst into the void? Would she reclaim her daughter, or would she lose herself forever? In the clutches of shadows, Susan stood poised on the brink of decision. Her heart pounded relentlessly, a frantic drumbeat urging her forward. She could feel the weight of despair pressing against her, mingling with the burning light of love needed to guide her through this darkness. Mama, please. Mia's voice echoed through the obscurity, threading through the chaos and igniting a flicker of hope deep within Susan's soul. In that moment, clarity washed over her. The shadows were not merely adversaries, they were reflections of her fears, her doubts, and the darkness she had buried deep within. But if darkness resided in her, so too did light her love for Mia. And that love could cut through anything, even this sinister mist. I will not surrender. Susan roared, summoning every ounce of courage she could muster. She clenched her fists, her love for Mia enveloping her like an incredible armor, shielding her from despair. That bond was her strength, and she wouldn't allow anything to eclipse it. With determination surging through her veins, she stepped boldly toward the cradle, its wood again thrumming with life beneath her fingertips. Shadows recoiled, their grip loosening as she advanced. I choose love. She shouted, her voice growing stronger with each syllable. We will not be consumed by you. The dark tendrils shrieked, writhing violently as Susan dove toward the cradle, reaching for the flicker of light that represented her daughter's essence. The connection between them pulsed in radiant warmth, urging her onward. She squeezed her eyes shut, drowning in the onslaught of shadows clamoring for control, drawing upon the memories of joy they had shared: Mia's laughter, the sunshine on their faces, the comfort of their unique bond. In her heart, she held on to that moment when Mia took her first steps, how they danced in the living room, how every silly story they shared painted a world free of fear. Bring it on. Susan challenged the encroaching darkness, and with a primal scream fueled by love, she thrust herself toward the heart of the turmoil. The clash was deafening. The shadows recoiled violently, shrieking in panic and rage as the light began to break through, shimmering brightly until it enveloped the room. In that glorious moment, the cradle illuminated with pure, blinding energy, and Susan felt an overwhelming urge to pull Mia toward her. Trust me. She yelled, reaching out desperately. Then, in an explosive burst of light, the cradle elevated, casting away the deep shadows and unleashing a radiant glow that filled every corner of the room. Susan felt Mia's presence merging with her own, the darkness evaporating into wisps of smoke struggling to hold form. Mama! Mia leaped into her arms, and as their souls intertwined, a warm surge spread through them both. No more fear. Susan echoed, and the shadows writhed, desperately trying to reclaim what they thought belonged to them. But this time, they would not win. This time, truth would prevail. With Mia held safely in her embrace, Susan faced the billowing darkness. You can't have us. She shouted, weaving their combined strength into a single, united front. The shadows shuddered, twisting as they began to fade. Susan and Mia anchored to each other, their hands intertwined in an unbreakable bond. And with one last surge of love, they pushed through, unleashing the true power of that light. The darkness exploded in a kaleidoscope of swirling colors, and with a deafening roar, it cracked wide open. In that moment, they erupted into daylight. The blinding sun poured over them, washing away every remnant of fear. The shadows were gone, scattering into nothingness, and the world around them shifted back, vibrant and alive. Susan blinked against the light, the familiar sounds of the village returning, birds chirping, laughter echoing from nearby cottages. They were free. Mia looked up, her eyes sparkling with innocence, marveling at the world around her. "Mom, we did it!" she exclaimed. "Yes, we did, my love," Susan replied, tears of relief streaming down her face, welcoming the warmth of sunshine as it enveloped them. They couldn't believe it, it was truly over. Together, stepping into the day, they left behind the haunting fog of Altenburg. The villagers, now just faces in a distant memory, no longer carried the weight of shadows. With newfound freedom, they made their way back to the car, holding hands and sharing silent smiles, a bond strengthened through love and the fight against darkness. As they viewed the quaint village one last time through the rearview mirror, Susan whispered a promise to Mia. "Nothing can keep us apart. No fear, no darkness ever again." That evening, under a vast and starry sky, the Harpers embraced their reunion, basking in the warmth of love. They had faced the unthinkable and emerged stronger together. And as they settled into the safety of their home, Susan reflected on the adventure. The shadows may have faded, but the echoes of their experience lingered, a reminder of courage found in the darkest moments. No longer bound by fear, they would face every tomorrow hand in hand. This was their new beginning. And as they drifted off to sleep, a glimmer of hope shone through, whispering what lay beyond those dark corridors, new adventures waiting to unfold, stories just waiting to be lived. Now, this is your moment to show your support. Subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive stories. It's crucial you don't get left behind. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm. Really, it makes a massive difference. You need to flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about this wild ending. Let's get that conversation going. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this explosive conclusion. Your support keeps the stories coming, and only true fans understand the importance of taking action.